sales is the most lucrative skill in the world, period. The problem is most sales advice out there today is outdated, cheesy, and can even keep you from getting the deals that can make all the difference in your career. This is the No BS Sales School, a podcast for entrepreneurs and salespeople who want to master the skill of selling without all the BS. Welcome to the No BS Sales School podcast. I'm your host, Walker McKay. Today, I'm pretty psyched. I've got a new buddy of mine, a new friend. His name is Brad Seaman, and Brad is the CEO and founder of a cool company called MonsterConnect. Brad's going to tell us about that, but today we're going to talk about outbound prospecting, why it's not dead, and know that that's an excuse, and what we can do to get ourselves better at it. Hey, Brad, welcome to the show.
What's up? Now, this should be a lot of fun, Walker. I hope we can we've had really good conversations. So I hope once we hit play, we can keep them going.
Yes, we will. So I want to talk about something that Brad and I are both, Brad turned me on to a podcast that I want to recommend to y'all. And it's called the Founders Podcast. And it's hard to find. There are about 50 Founders podcasts. This is by a guy named David Senra, S-E-N-R-A. And David has read 250 biographies. His goal is to get to 1,250. And he does recaps on his podcast of all these founders and people who have led businesses and people who've led creative lives. And Brad told me, you should listen to this, Walker. It's a pretty cool podcast. And damn it, if I hadn't spent like 20 hours in the last week listening to this podcast. It's fascinating. I highly recommend it to y'all. Brad, how'd you come across the Founders Podcast?
So I was actually looking for some information. I'm a really big fan of David Ogilvy. And so I was trying to find some information. I was trying to find a quote from David Ogilvy. And I came across this, and then I listened to the David Ogilvy podcast, and then I just got into all the other podcasts. And then I was hooked, which I know you haven't listened to this one. If anybody just picks it up, go listen. I think it might be number 27. I don't know which one it is, but it's called The Banana King. Super fascinating. It's an awesome book.
I can't wait. Well, I'm going to go listen to that one next. And I too, David Ogilvy founded Ogilvy and Mather advertising agency, right? And he's just he's kind of a business visionary.
Yep.
So Brad, tell me something. You started this business. Sounds like you've started a couple before and you worked in a family business. Take a couple of minutes and tell me your story. How'd you get to where you are?
So it's really, it was an evolution, and there were really three experiences. I worked my family had a call center, and we did lead generation for mortgage companies. Wow. And so my first couple jobs are working in the family call center, particularly running the call center software. I came out of college. I was planning on being a youth pastor. And my brother fired the COO. And so he said, hey, I'm leaving on vacation on Wednesday. I need you to come inside and manage these 400 reps while I go on vacation. And that was kind of my introduction into the family business, and I'll end up staying there. And then I realized really quickly, I loved the people, but the business model was very it just was very subject. I didn't love the mortgage space. wasn't a great. I didn't love it. And there was also the economy was starting to work against us. So before the Great Recession, we were doing lead generation for mortgage companies. So we started feeling it probably a year to 12 months early as people started doing weird stuff. Right. And so in that time, I'll spin out another business with my brother. I'd ran a small, inside the family business, I'd ran a small little appointment setting operation. And so we'd spin that out and start growing that. And we basically were setting appointments for software and technology teams. So they'd hire us, and we do the initial top of the funnel lead generation. And
did you do that yourself, or did you have people obviously work for you who did that?
Yeah, we had people doing it. So my brother he was really involved in the mortgage. So he had seen the mortgage market start to have shifts. Yeah. And he said, hey, I want you to go out and try to find a new market for us to get in. And so I got in. So we did a bunch of different, we really played around with a bunch of different stuff, but I got a little traction going in a back room with about 10 guys that were setting appointments for technology companies. And so I would spin that out, and then he'd eventually come join me. And so we did that for a couple years, and then that would eventually get, and we had huge growth, but that would get capsized by the recession.
Yeah, this is 2012. You're talking about 2012,
2008. So this would have been like 2008 to 2010.
Yeah.
So in a 2-year period of time, I mean, we rocket shipped appointment setting business to about from A guys to 120. Wow. And we had a really big footprint in the Microsoft and the Microsoft, SAP, and in the ERP space. But in that experience of growing the business, it just was really hard. There was a handful of things. I did not do I did not love the subjectivity of the business model. So we were doing a by appointment only model, which in general is a kind of a bad business model because you're putting yourself. It sounds like a great idea, right? As a client, you're going to pay for what you get. The challenge with sales is it's all really subjective. And you immediately put yourself in odds with your vendor. So you guys are not working together. You're working against each other. You're trying to pay as little as you can, and they're trying to get compensated for the work that they do. And it's just a really bad model. But the bigger issue was scaling it. So having 120 guys setting appointments was really hard to scale. It's hard to train. It was hard. The company's growing super fast. And so every time you had somebody who was really good on the phone, they'd get moved to
manager,
a VP position, or want to be a manager. I mean, just
take them off. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the model, one of the challenges with let me move this mic a little closer, see if that helps, because I think I might be a little far away.
No, you're doing fine.
One of the challenges I think in growing a sales team is getting people through the different stages of the position. So you've got an SDR, an account executive. And so most people do not want to be full-time. They don't want to be 20-year vets of appointment setters.
Hell no. Right.
It's just not, it's not what now people, and I think this is important too. I've had a lot of evolving concepts on this. Let's do this. Let me finish the story and then we'll talk about this. Cause I think let's talk about just how SDR teams are set up and how they're growing and how we think about them. Cause I think that's a topic in itself. Nonetheless, it was really hard to staff and hire and train. And so I realized pretty quickly that I was a software guy, that just my mind, the subjectivity, it was very difficult for me to not see a scoreboard. And the challenge with service businesses is there's not a clear way to keep score, right? Very subjective. And some people are really good at it and they love it. And, there's a lot of like, look at me, like building.
Yes.
I'm not that. I wanted a model that, you had a problem, we gave you a tool and the tool either did that or it didn't. And so, we'll end up phasing that company out and I'll find myself, basically trying to come up with new ideas. And, it's a long story, but basically I'd build a couple dialers in the appointment setting business. I was really understood the dialer because I was that's what I did as a high school and early college student. As mom definitely didn't put me anywhere. Dad put me in the call center and said, "Hey, run the software and understand how it works." And so, or I guess maybe my brother did. I don't know who put me in charge of it, but nonetheless, I ran it and understood it. And so I had this concept, which was like, how do we get a guy in a car from Indiana to Chicago and get him to interact with buyers without having to get a delayed transfer? That was kind of my initial hypothesis. And then, I just started evolving the process. Other people started kind of come to the same conclusion that I was coming to around the same time. And it looked like, hey, this is, what I did is I went out and found a third-party call center product that we could use to get started. And I proved there was a business model there. And then I just for the last decade have just been chipping away at it. And the business has been compounding and growing. And we raised some money in the first venture. And I decided, hey, I didn't want to do that a second time around. And so I've essentially, I've bootstrapped the business to date. And
let me can I break that for a second? So MonsterConnect, as I understand it, and I've watched the tool being used. I haven't used it myself yet, but I'm going to recommend it to clients. Is instead of the typical, outbound prospector is making 50 calls a day and they're going down their list and they're working it, and it can take a long time, right? And I'm decent at blocking time, and it takes in about 2 hours if I'm paying attention. And I'm really intentional about it, I can make between 35 and 40 calls, but that's on an extraordinary day.
And how many people are you talking to? Two, maybe one, maybe two?
Maybe one or maybe two.
Or two, okay.
And I did this, I work with this group called Salescast, who actually sponsors this podcast that you work with as well, Brad. Yep. And I watched them on this cold calling thing, and Brad's software, you load and I may get some of this wrong, you load the phone numbers into the system, or the phone numbers listed in the system, and you actually have people that are calling those numbers for the client. And when somebody connects, they hand the phone over to the sales guy. So you may be able to make 300 phone calls in an hour, correct? And connect people.
I mean, that's high, but you're losing 150, 250 calls in an hour. You're talking to 8 to 12 people. You're basically consolidating a whole day's worth of prospecting down into an hour. Where all the barriers, the challenges with traditional software is just that it's not designed to remove the barriers. So even with great AI, there's too many variations of obstacles that could occur that stop you from being able to get to your contact. Right. And so by adding this agent layer, so you've got the software you're logged into, and then we have this agent layer that does all the things that anywhere the context needs to be brought, they're bringing context to a phone call. So they're interacting with the administrative assistant. They're dialing automated attendant or IVRs or phone trees, however you want to think about them, or whatever you want to call them. Yes. And then they're in real time delivering you the conversation. So the challenge I had and how I kind of got here was I really had two challenges running an appointment setting business, maybe three. One of them was how do you scale the talent? That was probably the biggest challenge. Yeah. Is how do you get people and how do you scale them? And it's like any service business. Your service company is only as good as the people. And most service places struggle because they get into what I call peanut butter staffing, which is, it doesn't matter whether you're a web agency or a development firm or an appointment setting company, you're only as good as the people that you have producing the product. And what happens in most agencies, whether it's a development firm or a marketing agency or an appointment setting company, is they're taking their best people and they're moving them around on the accounts. They're spreading them as thin as they can to keep their clients. And then that's a really topsy-turvy business model because a lot of things, somebody gets sick, somebody doesn't show up, you have an illness in the family. And so this became a solution to that, which was, hey, you could take somebody and you could get more productivity out of them. I mean, when I think about it, it really was a management idea, not necessarily a prospecting. Like I wasn't prospecting and saying, hey, I want to get more out of myself. It was more like, hey, I had a team and I wanted to figure out how to get more out of that team. And that's kind of the initial perspective of that. So that's kind of how this got started.
Yeah. So we talked about Outbound is, a lot of people will say these articles, Outbound is dead. Nobody does that anymore. Obviously that's against your business model and mine too. Tell me, why do you think people say that Outbound is dead, Brad?
I think HubSpot's done a good job. I think they picked a villain. I think some of it's marketing, right? Yeah. They themselves are not against Outbound. In fact, they have 200 or some guys that are doing it. I think they justify some how they villainize Outbound by saying that people accept it and you're not interrupting their time. But the content is, the reality is everybody's read a dumb article they wish they hadn't read. So, it's all sales starts with interruption. I don't think you can get around.
100%. Yes.
So, you can justify it and say, oh, this person clicked and accepted or whatever. But I think, look, people want to have one thing. People were as buyer, just as people, it's easy to think about one thing. And as salespeople, it's easy to build a religion of sorts around one concept. And when you get into multiple things, it gets confusing. And so I think it's just easy to say outbound doesn't work, inbound works, as a way for that community to really push that idea forward. Now, the reality is, and you and I talked about this offline, is that anything successful has got multiple channels, right?
Yep.
Whether it's a business or a sales team. Heard a really good talk by a guy named Alan Nance, who ran a company called What Counts. I think I did try to think about where I saw this at. I went to, there's an event called Outbound, and it was in Atlanta, and he talked, and he coined this concept called Allbound. And he basically said, hey, look, you got to do all the things that it takes to get a sale. Sales is hard.
Right. Yep.
And so he had everybody raise a hand. Would you rather email somebody or talk to somebody? And he's like, look, hands down, getting people on the phone is the best way to sell. I mean, if you're not,
100%.
you have all the control on the phone, you have no control over email. And he's like, the reality is that you got to do all the things. You got to do inbound, you got to do outbound, you got to blog, and that's, I think that's true. So I think it gets a bad rap really for two reasons. One, there's a community of people that are using it as the villain to prop up their form of marketing or sales.
Yep.
And then I think the other thing is it's hard and not fun.
Well, it's an easy thing to believe because most people freaking hate cold calling.
Right.
I would say quite frankly, I think most people say they love cold calling are liars. The only reason we do it is because it works, right? Over time, it's a great way to, it is a way, it seems inefficient at the time, but over time, I think of prospecting as a way to build familiarity and context, right?
It's just like lifting weights. It's just like working out. People, don't want to work out. They'd rather take pills. That's why the pill market is larger than the lifting market or the exercise market. But the reality is, I think everybody would agree, and doctors, I'm not a doctor, but I think this is true, is that, having a regular workout, I don't want to give any physical advice on the podcast here, so don't take, I'm not a doctor or a nutritionist, but going to the gym regularly, working out is the best way to build your body and health. It trumps, not that you can't and shouldn't take maybe vitamins and supplements, but it should be a well-rounded, like anything, it should be well-rounded, and you should use it should be a multi-prong, right? You should work out regularly. You should take your vitamins. Same thing's true. People don't like to work out. They'd rather take pills. Phone prospecting, I think about it as being the exact same way. It's really a great way, and probably one of the best ways for you to build a well-rounded sales team is to have this as part of your sales process. The reality is it's hard, and it's hard to show up and do it regularly. So,
we don't get kissed very much either. We don't get much practice. When people are starting, they get a lot of practice hearing no and leaving voicemails, right? And so it's one thing that's got, it's not instant gratification. As a matter of fact, it's instant slap in the face over long periods of time.
Well, and I think a lot of that comes down, I want to hop in here because I think I read an article by a guy named Jason Lemkin, who a lot of you guys may be familiar with. He writes a blog called SaaStr. And he also puts a conference on called SaaStr. And the title of the article is that outbound always works if you do it right and you put in the time. And to me, that is really the basis of everything that I preach, is that most people have two or three things that they really care about. And your job as a salesperson is to find and understand what those two or three things are, and then to craft a pitch that addresses those two or three things. And most people simply do not do the work. They don't do the homework. They don't think about, and a lot of this just comes down to how we think about, like when we think about our clients, we think about industries, titles, revenue. We don't think about the things that are actually happening. And so most people just don't do the work. And I'll give a good example, kind of how we do our marketing. So we used to get a big list, and we'd find everybody that was in software and technology, and we'd call them up, and we'd say, we'd give them our pitch, and we'd immediately kind of get into a dialogue about, they'd say they didn't phone prospect. So now we're trying to argue with them over the phone on why they should.
Right. Yeah.
And at some point, I noticed that everybody that hired us we're hiring salespeople, and if we went to the job boards, so we went to LinkedIn and we went to Career Builder or wherever, we could really see what their issues were and what they were trying to solve for by the ads that they were running. And not just for salespeople, it could be for anything, right? But if you go to the job boards, you read through a job board pretty quickly, you can understand the challenges the business is having. And so we started we built a research team, and that research team would go through the job post. They'd find companies that were phone prospecting, because if you don't phone prospect, you're not a good fit. And then we grade them based on the amount of phone prospecting we thought they would do or doing. Because a lot of times it says, hey, you're making 200 phone calls in a day.
Right.
And then when we called those people, we'd say, hey, we see that you got an outbound team, or hey, we see that you have an account rep. And there's a lot of benefits to using the job post. First thing is they call their whatever they call that person. Some people call them SDRs, some people call them account reps, or whatever. You know, you could be an account rep, you could be
business development SDR. Or whatever.
Whatever you call them, we now call them. So we're now talking like the Romans talk. So when we call them, whatever they call it, we call it. Because if I call you up and you call them an SDR and I call them an inside sales rep, there's immediate confusion, right? You may have a whole different connotation. So now we're learning your language, and which is a side benefit, not the primary benefit. The primary benefit here of what was happening or is happening is that we're calling people and we know they have a need. They have a need to hire people to make phone calls.
Yep.
And that really changes the conversation versus just randomly calling somebody. So then it just comes down to trying to figure out who makes that decision. And we employed a research team to figure that all out. So they call into the accounts, they figure out who makes that decision. And then when you're calling up, you're having a really easy conversation. So I would say that it's not necessarily fish in a barrel. You're not shooting every one, but the percentage of hits went drastically up. Because now we're figuring out that, hey, that we already know they had a problem. And now we're just figuring out who makes that decision. And then the likelihood of them saying no goes down drastically because they care about it. That's what, I mean,
right. So they're trying to fix. It's a problem they're trying to fix right now.
Yeah. Yes. It's the problem they're trying to fix right now. And what happened, that's what this article by Jason Lemkin says is, hey, everybody's got 2 or 3 things they're trying to do. You just got to do the homework. You know,
so
always works if you do it right and put in the time.
So you've got this research team. So do you suggest that other companies, before they give a cold call list, that they spend time researching to find out why somebody might be trying to buy insurance or why they might need this, that, or the other?
Yeah, look, yes, 100%. And I think what doing the research does is it allows you to have a conversation versus having a call. And I'll give you an example. So you mentioned SalesCast. So the SalesCast, they're reaching out to people. They're saying, hey, we, see you have a blog. We want to talk to you, give you some hints. We've watched your blog. We want to give you some hints. Not an awful way to do it, but a better way to do it, the way I would do it is, hey, let's find everybody that's been on a show, doesn't have a podcast, and then let's call those people up and say, hey, I see you've been on some shows, but you don't have a podcast. What's going on?
Yeah. How come? Why
and
not?
Then they're like, who is this? And why are you calling me? Hey, I'm calling you because I just saw you didn't have a podcast and we're in that business and I'm trying to understand why somebody would show up to so many shows but not have their own podcast. Seems, it's just it's no different than how you would meet somebody at the line for ice cream. Hey, I really like your shoes.
Yeah.
Those are cool.
Talking about them, something they care about. Yeah.
That's a whole lot less, that's a whole lot less weirder than, hey, can I get 30 seconds to talk to you about why I want to talk, how interesting you are?
So how much of it is, I believe that the pattern interrupts are so important in sales. If we do what the prospect expects us to do, we're going to get treated like a salesperson.
I want to talk about that.
Bring it. Talk to me.
I don't know that I believe in the pattern interrupt. I think so would you consider this a pattern interrupt if I called you up and know something about you? Like if I call you up and I say, hey, Walker, I see that you're, a really big Indy 500 race car fan. Is that what's behind you? Is that a racetrack?
No, that's my marathon, New York City marathon.
I was going to go with marathon, but then I was like looking really hard. So behind you, I thought that was the Indy track. And then I thought you were standing down on you're obviously not now that I have context.
Yeah, it's cool. Right.
I thought, yeah. So if I call you up and I say, hey, I see that you're in marathons. Hey, I saw a picture of you at this marathon and I noticed you were wearing Nike shoes. Is there a reason why you were wearing Nike and not Adidas? Is that a pattern interrupt?
Well, maybe because you know something about me. Right? It's
different. Because I'm not a big fan of can I get,
30 seconds.
I think we spend way too much time trying to figure out what to say. We spend a lot of time talking about what to say and not who to say it to. And not what you say doesn't matter. And I do think it matters 100%. I mean, go. What you say matters. Go home and try to kiss your wife first thing in the door when she's not happy. So it does matter.
Yes.
But go try to kiss somebody that's not your wife. And let's see how that works.
Right. So tell me this. So how much time, because here's what I struggle with. Not everybody's big enough to have a research team.
Yeah.
So do I need to, before I make a sales call, before I make a prospecting call, do I need to look and see what this person likes? Hey, I see you went to Michigan State. I mean, I
don't think that to me, that's not relevant.
No, it's terrible. See, and again, if I was selling tennis shoes, the Nike versus Adidas would be fine.
Well, so here's the thing. I'm actually, and it's my personality, I'm highly offended if you're trying to butter me up.
Okay.
Like my walls, like if you start trying to grease me, I'm like, I might punch you in the face. Like
me too.
My 8 dominant personality, like I just don't need you to do that for me.
You're an
there's a group of
mate.
people that need that. Okay. But not me. I don't need that. So I'm offended actually. So, I think we get personalization and relevance really confused. And, I use the example of you being a runner. Yeah. But I would not use you being a runner like if I was prospecting you, I would not talk about that unless it was supporting, maybe it was supportive.
Yes,
and
sure.
If I'm a run, like let's say I'm a marathoner, then maybe I do bring this up because like I'm really into that. But if you say, hey, I see you like golf and I like golf, but I go to your LinkedIn page and you don't have any golf, like that just to me is totally irrelevant.
Yes. So what you're talking about is understanding, and does this mean specifically this person and their business? I guess if you can find that out, that's great, right? Or are you thinking about archetypes? So for example, that, people in this business right now, these kind of prospects are typically having these kind of problems with interest rates going up, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm thinking probably more high level. So maybe some of this is like I was a sociologist major, and which is kind of I think people sort of write off as like a not a great major.
No, I think it's one of the best majors for sales. Yeah, is that
it really had less to do with it had to do with the macro, not the individual. And so when I think, and look, I think there's all kinds of ways to do this kind of to sell. But for me, I'm always looking at the greater trends. So when I think about businesses, I think about businesses being their own organism. And yes, people buy from other people, but the business has its very own personality and culture. Yes. And an example would be you and I both talked about Liar's Poker. Salmon Brothers had its own culture that was unique to anybody else. And if you were going to sell to that culture, you would need to understand how and why they were buying things out. And the personalities obviously affect the culture. But Salmon Brothers itself had its own needs and desires. If you were selling to them, yes, you'd want to understand the decision maker as part of that, but you'd also want to understand the whole company because it's like hands and it's like a hand in your body. It's an individual body part. But it's also part of a larger organism. And I really think stuff more macro level.
So how do we? I mean, let's pretend you have a list.
Let me answer your research question.
Yeah.
I don't think, and a lot of times it's super simple what needs to be done. So let me give you a really quick example.
Great.
I got an email this morning from a guy named Justin, and he basically says, this is his email. Hi, Brad. I saw that your Google, I didn't even see the subject line, which was, we can increase your ROI too. I never saw that. I just saw his subject. And he said, hi, Brad. I saw your Google ad. And then it was a competitor's name. It was well written. Okay. So it was well written. He said it, but I took it in a way that wasn't greasy. I took it as it wasn't over, it was okay. It was thank you. I noticed competitors are driving up the bids on this keyword, and I have a couple suggestions on how you can outperform. That right there is all he had to say. He actually I believe he saw the ad because he meant what he mentioned. So I believe he actually saw it. The compliment was nice, but it wasn't he didn't. You ever get those LinkedIn messages that are
they're the worst.
Yeah, where they're really trying to butter you up. Like,
yes.
I want to learn about your wonderful consulting and entrepreneurial experiences. I'm just so enamored. I'm like, you don't know anything about me. Anyways.
Right.
So that's what he said. And then at the bottom, he's like, hey, we're in LA. Here's some of the clients we help. All this stuff's irrelevant because he had me on the first line. I bet it took him 30 seconds to do this. He typed in, our company name. He saw what ads we were running. He maybe pulled up SEMrush. It took him 30 seconds. To me, this was like really super relevant. He mentioned a competitor, which got my ears like, okay. He mentioned that the ad that we're running is going up, which it is.
Yep.
And now I'm like, okay, there's got to be something else out there. Now, if the company was, larger, I might have totally missed this because I don't care about ad copy anymore as a CEO. But, at 20 people, I still care. So I still care. So it was a very well-written ad. It took about 30 seconds. I think what has to happen is people just have to change their processes and spend an hour just going through pick a strategy and then high level, then just try to get everybody you can into that little strategy. So let's say you're a sales consultant. You can do the same thing. I mean, you could go to the job boards. You can see they're hiring people.
Yes.
They have a training issue. So now you reach out to them and you say, hey, look, I see you're hiring people. Typically that means that there's going to be training involved. How are you do you have a plan?
Yeah.
Tell me about that. I mean, I'm just curious. Most people aren't curious. That's the real problem, Walker. Prospecting doesn't work when you're not interested.
You've got to be sincerely curious, I would even say.
You got to be really curious.
Yeah, sincerely curious. It can't just be reading a list of questions off a sheet. I think we need to be questioning all the time. Why did you say that? And what does that mean to you? And how does that impact, right?
Yeah. And and I think you and I talked a lot about this. Some of the biggest damage that's done is sales reps go to Sandler. They're young and they come out and they ask a bunch of questions without any empathy or understanding of why, let's not call it empathy. Let's just call it, they're not interested. They don't really care what you say.
Yep.
And I think that creates a lot of damage.
Yeah,
because prospecting itself shouldn't be that difficult. You find a problem and a solution, and you just find the right person. You find the problem, then you find the right person that oversees that problem, and then you present a solution to that person. The person should inevitably be interested if that's what they do. If they don't do that, then they're going to tell you they're not interested, and then you're going to say, hey, phone prospecting doesn't work. But it could have simply been that they told you they weren't interested because that's not interesting to them because that's not what they do. When I look through our data and I look at people and when they say not interested, a lot of times it's follow one of two things. It says not interested. Then I look at the title and it's inevitably not interested to the title because it's not interesting to them. The VP of marketing just doesn't do this. That's not interesting. They are not interested in it. It's not interesting. So therefore, they're going to say they're not interested. And you could say all the right things to that person. But if it's not something they oversee, it's not something they don't oversee.
Care. They've only got a certain amount of bandwidth to take care of what they already have.
Right. And then we say stuff like, oh, well, who oversees that? And at that point, you may have just lost them. They just want to get off the phone. They don't care who oversees it. It's not their thing. You're paid to pay attention to what's important to you.
You've just wasted that person's time with your phone call. And so why the hell they want you to waste somebody else's or waste any more of theirs?
Here's the thing that I think is really interesting about phone prospecting. When people pick up the phone, the thing I always want to ask, and I really should do an experiment on this, is what do you think was on the other side? What do you think I was going to, what did you think was over here? You obviously didn't recognize the phone number. You thought there was something over here. So what was it that you wanted to hear on this other side of the phone that would have made you be super happy about me calling you? So there's something over there. Everybody wants something, right?
Yeah, we've all got pain. There's always a gap.
Everybody wants a miracle.
Yeah.
You're in your job, you're a VP of sales, you pick up the phone. What do you want? What you want to hear is, hey, Walter, this is Brad. I'm at IBM. I got a referral from you. Or somebody referred me to you.
Yep.
And we've got 300 brand new reps we're taking through training. and I want to see if you train all of them.
Yep. Yeah,
that's what you wanted to hear when you picked the phone up.
That's correct. Of course, right?
So anyways.
Oh, it's good. So Brad, the product again is MonsterConnect, and it's a fabulous tool if you want to be more efficient and effective at getting in touch with people and actually having sales conversations. Brad, how would somebody find you if they wanted to do that?
Yep, you can you can find the company at MonsterConnect.com. You can find me at LinkedIn. So if you just go to LinkedIn and type in Brad Seaman and MonsterConnect, you'll find me there. And that's probably the best. LinkedIn's probably the best place. I could throw out a Twitter handle and some other stuff, but
we'll LinkedIn's just start there. You can find the rest of it at LinkedIn, and it's Brad Seaman, right. BradSeaman. So, No BS Sales Team, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. There's a lot of stuff here, and we'll have links to everything that we've talked about in the show notes. Do me a favor. Help me help you. Please go to Apple Podcasts and write a review. Helps. A bunch of y'all have done this. I appreciate it very much. It helps raise my rankings in inside the Apple Podcast thing, so we get more exposure. If you will write a review on Apple Podcasts and then take a picture of it and send it to me, text it to me, 803-917-2817, or send it to walker@walkermckay.com. I'll call you. I have got a cool gift that I'll give you that you will like. So if you will do that, I would certainly appreciate it. Hey, Brad, thanks for being on the show. I've enjoyed being here and talking to you, and I think y'all got a great thing going on.
Thanks. It was great. Thanks for having me.
You're absolutely welcome.
Thanks for listening to the No BS Sales School podcast. If you haven't already, please take 1 minute to write a quick review for the show. It really does make a huge difference. Also, subscribe to the show and please forward this episode to somebody else who needs to hear it. As a bonus for listening, I'm going to give you access to a free mini course, 7 expensive sales mistakes you're making and what you can do about it. Go to www.7salesmistakes.com and get access to the free mini course. That's the number 7salesmistakes.com. Thanks again for listening to the No BS Sales School podcast.